Welcome back. It's Tim and Julie Harris. And you know what this is? This is Fantastic Fun Friday. This is where we talk about really whatever the heck we want to talk about. Usually it's real estate adjacent, I'll say. But on today's show, as we do on every Friday show, what we're trying to do is keep it lighthearted, fun, and somewhat interesting. So, Julie, without any further delay, welcome to today's Fun Friday.
Thank you. Yes, we made it to another Friday. So anything goes. We warned them yesterday that we're going to just talk about whatever we want to. So where would you like to start?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you what's top of mind because I just got done returning some messages about this. People are asking us for more information about why we're so optimistic about the housing market. And we had some people that were sort of, I think, steadfast in being pessimistic about the 2025 housing market. And they weren't using facts. They were sort of like looking for support of their pessimistic beliefs. A lot of folks that were asking about why we're so resolute that there's not going to be a housing crash. And, when I get questions like that, it's sort of like, well, where do I begin? So what I always ask them is, well, will you tell me why you think there's going to be a housing crash? Or, you tell me why this doom and gloom scenario that you've painted in your mind is going to be true. And they never have an answer. Or they'll say
Right.
something that's kind of half baked, and then them having to answer the question, realizing they didn't really have a reason for thinking why they were thinking in the first place, usually puts it into the thought. And that tells me that those folks were probably caught in an echo chamber where essentially they're just hearing the same thing that they thought over and over and over again. And that's, unfortunately, that's a real, a mental state that a lot of us get caught in. We just constantly are reinforcing our beliefs and our thoughts. And some of the beliefs and thoughts you have, not all of them are bad, obviously, but these folks in particular, the messaging I was getting, not all of them, obviously, a lot of them people are very positive about, especially our message about make housing great again, that podcast we did this week. But there's some folks that I think are scared. There's a lot of uncertainty, I think, in certain parts of the country that are causing people to not feel as optimistic as they otherwise would be. So you asked me what I was thinking about as that because I just got done trying to sort of, coach a lot of people through their mental and emotional quagmire. So, yeah, maybe we talk a little bit about that
Yeah.
today.
Well, I think the uncertainty is real. I think that part is true with many people, uncertainty about taxes and tariffs and interest rates and home prices and all that. But that's a lot of that, at least half of that is always true. And I think the other perspective, you were talking a little bit, I guess you would call that confirmation bias. Like if you believe things are going to be negative, then you're probably looking at things that are negative. And of course, social media works against you on that because if you maybe you read one article and maybe you were just curious about something that sounded negative, and then they keep on feeding you more and more negativity. And then something happens and you're in that doom and gloom. I think that's one thing. The other thing that I think causes some of this consternation about is the market going to be good or not good is just the unfamiliarity and the lack of exposure to a different kind of market. So for example, if I'm an agent that's used to going from listing to listing, maybe I figured out how to list and not be too dependent on buyers. But in my whole experience has been, I listed and it sells like this. I listed, it sells like this, right? Excuse me. And maybe many times it was even with multiple offers and over list. And now I find myself with a listing that sat for 30 days and the seller's yelling at me, why isn't my house sold? It would be easy to believe that the market's crashing because your experience is so different than your previous 8 or 10 listings. So I think some of it's not really their fault. It's just the way it's been for a while. And
You're talking about exposure, right?
it's exposure and it's
Well,
perspective, that sort
but
of thing. Yeah.
exposure to so like what you're describing is an exposure to a changing market, exposure to a
Yes.
buyer's market, exposure to higher interest rates, lower
More
interest rates.
competition.
Yeah, I mean it's essentially lack of exposure, and we all have this tendency to believe all of history is the time while we were alive,
Right.
and so a lot of folks listening now are there. They may have been alive, but they certainly weren't paying attention as real estate folks back in the 90s and or the early 2000s, and they didn't really realize that a lot of the after September 11th, you trust me when I tell you guys, that was not a normal housing market. And there was
No.
nothing normal about how the country felt. And then there's so many other examples. But really, at the end of the day, after having all those experiences, and you and I have a combined age now of 109, right?
Yikes.
Since we had our birthdays earlier this month. But yeah, so I think about like, what is it if I had to encapsulate how to help somebody really move past their mental and emotional malaise? So they don't actually create the perception, their perception is maybe that things are a little stagnant or things aren't progressing. And that's, by the way, what people want more than anything. People
Hmm.
don't necessarily want the latest and greatest, and they don't always, it's all, they just want to feel they're progressing. There's a human need to constantly be improving and feeling like you're moving forward. And when you
Things are
feel
getting better.
right,
Right.
exactly. Well, yeah, getting better. But if you don't, exactly, if you don't feel like you're progressing in life, in some way, I mean, I look at my mom, she's 85, and she progresses with her painting, or she's progressing with some of the things that she's reading, or she's progressing with a little bit, she goes a little bit further every day on her walk or whatever it is.
Hmm.
Everybody has this innate desire to feel like you're progressing. And if you don't feel like you're progressing, and even worse, if you feel like you're being pushed backwards, you start to get real ornery because it goes against your nature. So you got to be introspective about the emotions you're feeling and ask yourself, not even ask yourself, you don't have to like try to, shrink yourself basically, or try to be your own, you know,
Dr.
armchair
Phil yourself.
psychologist, your Dr. Phil, right? You've just got to acknowledge the fact that you do have this innate desire to move forward. So if you're right now in your real estate market, if it's a little stalled out, things are taking a little bit longer to sell.
Mhm.
Well, what is that? How can you progress in an environment like that? You've got to embrace the fact that you have to, play the cards you were dealt. And if the market right now is going to have longer days on the market, well, guess what? This is a great way for you to progress and learn how to deal with sellers. Yeah, I'll tell you where every time I hear those types of complaints from folks, it's, well, I'm getting excited because I'm thinking about expireds, right? So if it's progressing, and if the market's changing and the days in the long market are taking longer, and the other agents, my competitors, don't know how to deal with sellers who are full of their own levels of anxiety because their house hasn't sold, that means that those current listing agents won't be the listing agents on those listings for much longer. And if they go to expire, I have a probably more than a legit chance of getting, you guys get the point? So even
Yes.
when you're in a market or an environment where other people are feeling fear, you should realize that you don't have to participate in it. Because ultimately, here's where it goes. If you believe that your tomorrow is not going to be better than your today, and whatever way you want to quantify that, what does that do to your behaviors today? So ask yourself that question. If you believe that tomorrow isn't going to be better than today, it doesn't have to be 1,000% better, but if it isn't going to be better, if you're not going to be progressing, let's say, what do you do? What actions do you take today? Or what actions do you not take today? I mean, if I didn't believe my tomorrow was going to be better than today, I wouldn't have gone to the gym today.
No,
I wouldn't
would
have
have been
taken stuff.
purely optional.
I would have gone to Krispy Kremes, and I would have gone through the drive-through 3 or 4 times. And when I was waiting in line to hit the drive-through again, I would have cleared out that box of donuts. I'd have looped it all day. I'd be doing it right now. I mean, the reality of it is I wouldn't be saving money. I wouldn't be worrying about, Zoe's college education, or I wouldn't,
Wouldn't have
all
taken
that.
your supplements this morning.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, there's all those things. So if you don't believe that tomorrow's going to be better than today, what you start to do, and this is what happens if you become too much of a skeptic or a pessimist, or, you get caught in that sort of adult downward spiral of believing that tomorrow's not going to be better than today. You start manifesting or creating that reality for you because you stop doing the things that you would have done had you believed that tomorrow was going to be better than today. You guys get it? And I think a lot of cases, that's what happened to our country over the last 4 or 5 years. Sorry if that sounds political, but when eggs are costing what they cost and inflation does what it did, and when there's this much of a, housing, when housing costs 5 or 6x% of what 6% more than what the average person can afford, in terms of home prices, where the norm is 2 to 3, there's a lot of reasons why people are going to start easily falling into the belief that tomorrow won't be better than today. And that does cause social unrest. When you
Mhm.
have a mass of people that feel like they've been screwed out of the American dream, whatever incarnation that is for them, they're going to get mad because it goes against their nature. They don't feel like they can progress. They don't feel like they're able to move forward. They feel like the cards are stacked against them, and all those types of emotions. So if you're feeling in any way that, it's funny, this is just in a response to probably about 5 or 6 messages on Instagram, but if you're feeling in any way that your tomorrow isn't going to be better than today, ask yourself, what proof do you have that that's true? And who would you be if Julie, do you remember those questions? Do you have them
Yeah.
memorized? So
Well,
ask the question.
the first thing is, what is it that you believe? State the actual belief. Then the second thing is it absolutely true? Can you prove that it's absolutely true? The third one is who are you right now because you're believing that it is true? And the fourth question in our question tree is who would you believe if you decided, I'm sorry, who would you be if you didn't believe that anymore?
That's
So
right.
you can follow that through with your statement is tomorrow going to be worse than today. Well, how do you know that? Is that just based on doomsday scrolling or is that based on something? And how are you behaving? As you said, what are you doing or not doing today because you believe that? And what if you were to turn that around? What if you stopped believing that? Who would you be? How would you operate differently? And I think that's a great little filter system to put those types of beliefs through. And the same thing for positive beliefs too. You know, you could be off track on something that you're believing and you just, you're off track because something's changed
Well,
and
but
take
Julie,
that
that's a
too.
really good point. What if you believe like you just bought a lottery ticket and for sure it's going to pay off tomorrow?
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good point. I never actually have thought about that. If you believe that tomorrow is going to be better than today, to the point where you don't really feel like you have to make any effort today, then you're going to lose. That's going to work against you as well. It
Mm-hmm.
always goes back to the same set of thoughts and emotions, Julie, that we convey all the time in our coaching and our podcast. Is like you want always. It's always comes down to if you want ever increasing levels of, improvement in your business and personal life, you have to do what you don't want to do when you don't want to do it at the highest level.
Yep.
And that's no matter how, and that detaches your effort from your emotional state. And that's a really big part of it. So if your emotional state is dictating how you're actually, the actions you're going to take, you're never going to take the actions because your
Yep.
emotional state changes all the time. But yeah, and it just is, it's everything in life. Unfortunately, it would seem now that you and I are at 109 combined age, right? It does seem I do wish that it was more, I do wish there were more winning lottery tickets,
For sure.
but they're not.
Yeah.
It's essentially about the accumulation effect and making that work against you. And there's two ways it can work for you, it can work for you or against you, right? Go both ways. So the accumulation effect is you're essentially, slowly accumulating. We'll just keep it practical. Money, right? So you're peeling off 10% of every dollar you earn and you're putting it in the S&P 500. And for the longest time, you don't really feel or see any benefit from it because, it takes a long time for those numbers to compound. And then after, they're talking about reworking the Social Security Administration. So every baby that's born in the United States, there's going to be like a certain amount of money that's socked away in the Social Security fund for whatever it's going to be called for the kid. Because like if you put $5,000 into a S&P 500 when the kid's born, on average over the last 20 years, that money's going to appreciate by 10.3% per year, which means it's going to double every like 7 years or even really less than that. So by the time that kid's of retirement age, they're going to have millions and millions of dollars. And the S&P 500 is pretty much, the most, I would say, consistent appreciator with the least risk of volatility. There'll be up years and down years, but if you guys, go
Mhm.
to Grok or OpenAI and have it do a little, go and ask what has the S.
Projections.
Yeah, do projections for yourself, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But yeah, I mean, all these types of things, the compounding of your efforts every single day, the compounding of it could be good or it could be bad. So, for example, if you drink too much alcohol and you do that every single day, there's an accumulation effect that happens in your body that over time it's going to start adversely affecting your body, your health, your mindset, all those things. You're going to start not liking the way you look, the way you behave, and that's accumulation effect working against you. If you're doing the savings and the money's compounding, and then it's the accumulation effect working for you. If you're every single day consciously practicing and practicing by calling proactive lead generation, be it for rent by owners, for sale by owners, for expired listings, there's an accumulation effect that happens in multiple levels. It's becoming easier for you to do what you don't want to do, and you don't want to do it at the at the highest level. And remember, I said easier. I didn't say easy. It never becomes easy.
Sure.
But it's becoming more of a habit to do it, right? So you're doing that every single day, but you're also getting better at the objection handlers. You're getting better at managing your emotions. You're getting better at feeling not reacting to the anxiety or not reacting to the fear. So that's the thing that is the hardest to understand, especially we're in times like this, because so many things have changed so rapidly. I mean, yesterday we did the podcast on all the things, the changes that have happened as a result of the commission sharing lawsuit. And you'd think from the surface, well, those were all bad, but I came up with lots of reasons why I did believe that they're good,
Hmm.
and we talked about that yesterday.
Well, that gets back to perspective, though, doesn't it?
Right,
And part
exactly.
of the reason you have that perspective is because you've been in real estate for more than 2 seconds and you've had five gajillion coaching calls and lots of different things. So I think that sometimes people just lack the experience and the perspective. And I used to really get irritated when somebody would say that to us in our early career, like, well, you just have to do your time, blah, blah, blah. Well, you can't just make that happen, right? But you can backfill some of that experience deficit. It's one of the things that we teach in Premier Coaching is you can't just give somebody the experience of 100 transactions and all the millions of things that you learn when you've been that transactional. But what you can do, and we have a list in Premier Coaching that team leaders have, that brokers have, that even solo agents can use with themselves to try and fast forward some of that experience and some of that exposure. For example, when you first get into real estate, maybe the only houses that you've seen is a couple of open houses, your parents' house and your house. How are you going to know how to price anything? So we have a whole thing that we go through about how to get that kind of experience. Maybe it's the first time you've ever had a listing that didn't sell in 22 seconds overnight. Well, don't just do nothing about that. You can fix that. I think this gets back to recognizing what it is that you need. And that's not always the easiest thing. I had a coaching call today, and the client was very insightful. And he said, I want you to see what my schedule is. I want you to see my number of contacts, who I'm talking to. And he was very good at charting all of this out. And he said, because I know that my perspective isn't going to be what you see. I'm in it every day. I think I'm doing all of the things I'm supposed to do. And by and large, he was doing most of the things he's supposed to do. But having that outside perspective, like, okay, well, let's look at all of these different elements and maybe there's some tweaks that we need to do. When you're the one in it, that's really hard. When you're the one that the seller's yelling at, why haven't you sold my house in 2 weekends? All you feel is like that emotion and that stress. And like, what am I going to do?
Or
Right?
most of these guys do, Julie, is they're not even coming in contact with their sellers. They're just hiding from them.
Or that's
right?
even worse.
That's even worse. Yeah. But that's what most agents do.
That's true.
They just ghost their sellers and they don't even know what to say. And we do have the 12-week communication plan. When you take a listing, it's telling you exactly what you should be doing every single week, obviously, for the 12 weeks. For the first 12 weeks, you have the listing. And by the way, if you end up where you started and it hasn't sold on the 13th week, well, guess what? Start with week 1 again and just do it all over again.
But that's an example of backfilling the experience deficit and just saying, all right, well, let's recognize you don't know what to say, and that's why you're not calling the seller. So let's figure out what to say, not just once, but this week and next week and the next week if it hasn't sold yet. Hopefully you won't make it to the 12 weeks. But if you do, now we've just removed your excuse why you're not talking to your sellers and you're hiding out and being a secret agent, which is not a great strategy.
Well, what you're talking about really, and I don't think you and I intended for the Friday show to be anything about selling coaching, but the reality of it is that the only way you could shortcut by reading books, I suppose. You could save off years by by having a good mentor or maybe somebody that in your office where you can kind of just pop in occasionally, get some ideas. But really the key is, and this is what Julie and I have always done, is you just have to hire really good coaches. And if I'm trying to learn anything, like I'm trying to learn some things about webinars, frankly, and I'm just going to hire somebody and I'm going to have them teach me everything. I'm not going to watch all the instruction manuals and try to understand this and the other things. I'm just going to hire someone that's really, really good at it so they can, educate me and fill in. And that's the way to do it. And anybody performing, I'm a huge Formula One nerd. And all of those guys have multiple coaches, performance coaches, health coaches, and all. And why would you do that? It's not because they need to be told what to do every single step of the way. It's because having somebody look over your shoulder and be, tactfully critical of what you're doing right and mostly what you're doing wrong. Yeah, a coach sometimes is, I listen to Julie's calls sometimes. I would say probably 75% of the time, she's just refilling their cup, making them feel good, telling them where they're doing a good job. She's not just looking for whack-a-mole and things to criticize them on.
That's right.
But like if you're really a high performer, you want to have somebody that's going to look for the things to criticize you on, and you're not going to be recoiling at the idea that you can improve. When you come across someone in your life that cares for you enough to actually be objectively critical in such a way that they're willing to sacrifice even a part of your relationship or certainly your feelings to tell you where you need to be improving, that's somebody you should probably keep very close to you. Because for the most part, people don't even think about it. Anybody else other than themselves. They sure as hell don't think about, how I can help somebody else. They will pay that lip service. They'll do all the virtue signaling to make you think that that's how they're thinking. But very, very few people will actually take the time. Julie, when was the last time in the gym, for example, when we go to the
Mm,
gym every day, when was the
mhm.
last time somebody came up to you and actually said, you know what, Julie, you're not doing those sumo squats exactly right? I can only think of two people, well, three people.
Boot camp. Yeah.
Well, boot camp, right? So the
Yeah.
two coaches, but also me and you. Like
Yeah.
when you're doing
Sure.
something wrong, I'll
Hmm.
point it out. And like it's so easy to do it too. It's so easy to fall into bad habits where you're not keeping your back straight or you're not, all the things. And then next thing you know, you're hurting yourself. And then you've been doing it the wrong way for so long because no one's corrected
Yeah.
you.
That's because
You,
you're in it. That's what I was talking about with
yep.
when you have your own perspective and your own confirmation bias. And of course, I always want to think, I'm doing it right because I'm me and I'm suffering right now. And I want to get to that 10th or 12th rep. Right. And then somebody like you walk by and you're like, hey, did you know that your back isn't straight when you're doing that? Or one of the coaches will be like, you need to do it this way so that you don't injure yourself. That is somebody that cares about you. They don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. You just keep walking by,
Yep.
So I think it does come down to that. And not just obviously, we're real estate coaches, so we would talk about real estate coaching, but in many different parts of your life. I used to, back when Zoe was littler and she was taking gymnastics, I was very grateful that who she was taking gymnastics from was an actual Olympic gymnast. It makes a big difference because that coaching I can rely on. She's not going to let my kid get hurt as she's, tangling around all these things. So I think that it's not just finding the right coach, finding a coach, but finding somebody who has walked in the shoes that you want to grow into.
Well, yeah. I mean, so I'm learning how to race on a racing simulator. It's one of my I just am crazy. It's so exhausting that I can't do it every day because it is
But
so
you still love it though, even though
I do.
that's
I
true.
love it. I do. I
Yeah.
love it. And I won second place at Mid Ohio last
Yeah.
weekend, which was
Nice work.
fantastic.
Yep.
Yeah, but so
That's awesome.
for me to improve, I'm not doing bad, right? But for me to improve and consistently, uh, podium, let's say, I'm gonna have to hire a coach, and I know I am.
Mhm.
And I'm really good at the Mid Ohio track. That's where I actually originally learned to race in real life. But if I'm going to go to some other, track, I'm going to be at a huge disadvantage.
Yeah.
I might know aspects of how the car is going to act, the physics of it, but I'm sure as heck not going to know the track. So you guys get the point.
And
So
you're
it
going to
is
have to
back.
trust that coach that says, hey, let's try a new track and maybe even new car, or new setup or whatever, that they're seeing those steps ahead and what you need before you see it yourself.
But Julie, you realize where this all started was essentially the folks asking, basically expressing their not really understanding why you and I are, knowing this
Positive.
is about the new golden age of housing, right?
Hmm.
And how we know, and I think I'll say this as much as I can be 100% confident. I don't think you can be 100% confident in anything, but it definitely feels like we're at the very beginning stages of, a whole 25 years probably of an
Sure.
ever increasing, improving housing boom. If you just look at the all the things we gave this information you guys long form. It's in the newsletter, by the way. I wrote a very detailed article about this, and then Julie condensed it for our podcast. So the podcast is probably 20% of what's in the article.
Yeah,
If you want the
maybe.
article, you got to go to harrisrealestatedaily.com, and on harrisrealestatedaily.com, that's where all the notes are. But yeah, when I was going through that whole process, and I was having to test my own biases, being optimistic, and some of my own biases, maybe like I'm always looking for reasons to believe why I might be wrong because I
Mhm.
don't want to operate on under bad information. And I used Grok AI, I used Open AI, and I had both the AI challenge me on my precepts to find out where I might be having some blind spots. And that's where I came up with that article. And it was really fascinating as I was going through the exercise. It Once I was able to work through how to phrase the questions and align my thinking with how the AI wants to have questions asked of it, I was really, I think, rejoiceful in realizing how in alignment with the facts my thinking actually was and is.
Mhm.
Because if you can't argue against demographics, that's really the bottom line. I
Sure.
mean, look, guys, if we were selling something, if we're no longer in the housing business, we're in the I don't know what it doesn't matter. Something that Ginsu knife business, right? Now
Mhm.
everybody needs a Ginsu knife, and once you have a Ginsu knife, you don't necessarily need another one. But real estate's one of those is one of the only products that you can sell that everyone needs. Everyone wants more of. Everyone wants to buy or sell. It just doesn't matter. You're selling
Yeah.
something that everyone
The
uh,
necessity.
Yeah, and here's the other really cool thing, which leads us to the firm belief that it is going to be the era of make housing great again, is that housing is the largest uh, segment of the GDP. It's not tech, it's not all these other things, it's real estate, trillions and trillions of dollars. And if you look and read that article and listen to the podcast, if you just look at the facts, it's kind of obvious when there's 4 to 5 million homes that are needed in order to basically meet demand.
Yeah.
Think about that. It's just astonishing. There's so much money that's going to be made in the real estate industry. That's just on new construction and resale as well
Mm-hmm.
over the next 25 years. That if you're not in real estate, you should get into real estate. If you know, I suppose real estate and AI are going to be the two largest growth sectors in the economy. No, that's if that doesn't make you excited, it's because you're probably intentionally, or maybe not intentionally, but maybe now you're realizing, subconsciously, you're trying to believe that your tomorrow is not going to be better than your today. You're going against your very nature. And so if you're at the point where you're realizing that maybe I am intentionally trying to look for reasons to be pessimistic, the next thing you got to do, you got to go through a kind of a, I don't know, you got to ask yourself why you think that way. What is it about you that wants you to believe that tomorrow won't be better than today? And having gone through these exercises with coaching clients, I can tell you what the answer is. They just don't want to do the work. They don't want to make themselves uncomfortable, or they are fearful of how to do the work and making themselves uncomfortable. And I get it. I mean, I understand completely, but you have to progress forward. It goes against your nature not to. And if your thinking and your belief structure about, your future is bleak, you're going to make yourself sick, and you're going to start, and I mean that physically sick. You're going to start destructing yourself. And, again, Julie and I are in this sort of human behavioral business of being real estate coaches. We're sort of
Yeah.
psychology adjacent. But if you start fighting against your nature of always progressing forward, what fills that? What other things do you start welcoming into your life? Can you guys think of anything positive? You start doom scrolling, you start using alcohol, drugs, you start doing all these other bad behaviors, you stop working out. Like, so if you all of a sudden start or if you rather, you stop trying to progressively improve your life, you do welcome in all kinds of behaviors that will destroy your future. And then you're going to wake up in 10 years and you're going to realize, I wish I wouldn't done that. I hadn't done that. And hopefully you're going to have the time and the gumption and the coaches and the leadership to turn your life around. And if you're not in a place right now in any aspect of your life, spiritually, family-wise, financially, physically, mentally, emotionally, if you're at a place and you're experiencing any kind of hardship in your life right now, you got to you got to forgive yourself. And then you got to realize that I'm where I'm at now. Like, I'm not 25 pounds or 40 or 50 pounds overweight. It didn't happen overnight. It happened accumulatively. So you got to forgive the past version of yourself that wasn't disciplined enough to stay in good physical shape. And you've got to unring that bell. But the first thing you've got to do is you got to realize that your current existence, how you look, how you feel, the money you have, the money, all these things, it's a direct representation of the decisions you were making yesterday. So if you think that you're making good decisions and you're thinking of taking that decision-making apparatus into your future, you've got to look at your present situation and be objective about what you find. So for example, I don't need to improve any aspect of my financial management. Well, what's your finances like? How are you doing on debt? How are you doing on savings? How are you doing on all those things? And if you're, go to OpenAI or, Grok, who Julie and I love Grok. It's so much easier to use now than OpenAI. Something happened in the last 2 weeks or month even that made Grok so much superior to OpenAI. You guys should go test it. So yeah, test your financial precepts. Go say, this is my age, this is the amount of money I have saved. This is the amount of money I'm saving per year. If I were to retire or wanting to scale back work at this particular point in the future, and inflation adjust, and then run all these precepts through Grok, and it'll create the most elegant financial analysis for you. And then some of you, just me saying those words is going to cause you to recoil because you don't have to think about those things. Well, guess what you're doing? You're locking in the reality that your tomorrow financially is going to be, probably somewhat bleak and not what you otherwise would have wanted for it to be. And if that maybe jumping off point is 10 years into the future where maybe you do want to scale back. 10 years from now, if you've not taken what I just said seriously, you're going to be regretting that the version of you today didn't make yourself uncomfortable for the 20 minutes it took for you to have the AI do the analysis for you, let alone having saved the money. Does that all make sense, Julie?
Yeah. And I think that you can turn it around the other direction too, because we have listeners that are in a really great financial position
Yep.
who work out every day. They have their act together. They're following a schedule. They're in a pretty good place. And for those of you, you want to stay on track or ahead, right? So what got you there? And is that sustainable? That's part of the consternation that we were talking about earlier in the podcast about agents that find themselves in a bit of a different type of market. Maybe right now you're riding off of your 21 and 22 sales, and maybe you were smart enough to save and invest some of that money off of those really rocking few years that everybody experienced. But use Grok, use OpenAI to say, all right, here is my situation now. My plan was to have my house paid off in the next 5 years. Am I still on track to do that? What if my business this year is 20% down because some predictions say, maybe in my market, there's going to be fewer sales. So do some predictions, because just because you're on track now doesn't mean you're on track forever. And are the things that got you here going to be sustainable? Even with a workout, right? The trainers say one of the reasons that boot camp is effective is because they do different things every day, every session. And you don't get into the same exact workout just because you know how to do it and you're good at it and you've learned to suffer through it. You switch it up. Maybe your finances, maybe your lead generation and real estate, different things. Even when you are on track, you've got to do those checkups. We use monarchmoney.com, and I use that with our coaching clients as well, because that's a great dashboard to see what is your snapshot today and what is the trend line. Is it going up? Is it going down? Why? Okay, it's gone down for 3 days. What am I doing? Oh, I've outspent maybe the commissions that I came in this month with, so that you are conscious of it. To your point, Tim, not hiding out from these facts, whether that's health, nutrition, habits, earning, all of those things. Because I think somewhere in between what you're talking about, having that negative doom scroll of believing that my tomorrow is worse than today, and I'm going to find things that reinforce that negativity, that versus what we're talking about, especially with the real estate business doing great, somewhere in between is this thing called complacency, where you're not even paying attention to, are you thinking positively or are you thinking negatively? You're just not even thinking about it. And I think that that's dangerous too. So when we talk in coaching about daily habits and daily minimum standards, that's what we're talking about is really a lot of consciousness, awareness, being present with your money, with your health, with your family, with your relationships, even we were talking about with your listings, don't go a week without talking to them, being present, not on a million different things, but on the things that matter the most.
Not everybody wants that level of accountability, though. I don't
Sure.
always want to coach at the gym. Not
Me
everyone
neither.
wants, yeah. I mean, but you're right. If you're not being monitored, you're going to most assuredly slide back. You're going to become complacent, and the accumulation effect will work against you. Yeah. So I think we've belabored this point enough. But the moral of the story is guys, listen to the podcast we did this past week on, what we do believe is going to be what Trump will call make housing great again. And we are seeing so many breadcrumbs. Yesterday, I'm going to say this guy's name wrong, Julie. Scott
Percent.
Bissett. Thank you. He was talking about he's the new Treasury Secretary. He was talking about the sovereign wealth fund. And he was talking about how Fannie and Freddie are going to mix in just all this stuff. And I know this stuff is very confusing and just doesn't even why do I care about this? I'm just here to sell houses, because all that is leading to the same all of it's leading to the same point where housing is going to become, he talked about affordability of housing. He talked about he talked about the thing Julie and I talked about all the time. Like, look how there's been sort of this complacency that's formed in the housing industry over new construction being stick built and modular homes or 3D printed homes. There's no carve out for anything other than stick built homes, homes built of wood. Well, Scott talked about the fact that, hey, guess what? We're in 2025 and, you can make houses out of all kinds of different things. And we need to loosen up on some of these ridiculous, carryovers from the 1920s and 30s about our belief structures about real estate. And you can see how there's an unmet need of 4 to 5 million homes in the United States alone. And just if you think about that, 4 to 5 million homes, How many home sales did there happen all of last year? Guess what? About 4 million, and that's not including new construction.
Yeah.
So we're looking at a unmet need of homes that's going to go decades into the future, and that should be making all of you guys very, very excited. So listen, if you're not feeling the way you know internally, subconsciously, intuitively that you need to be feeling, it's probably because you're not listening to enough podcasts like this one. It's probably because you are hanging out with people that are causing you to get stuck in your emotional quagmire. That you're maybe in a brokerage that isn't, that's feeling what people are just waiting around for the clouds to clear. All these different things. It's your environment. Julie and I talked about that. So if your environment is a bunch of people that are themselves complacent, are themselves pessimistic, you're going to naturally become like them. It's inevitable that you're going to, you're going to absorb some of their emotions. That just is what it is. So I'll strongly encourage you to do Julie's favorite, checkup from the neck up, right? Do a checkup from the neck up and ask yourself, how am I feeling? Am I feeling optimistic? Am I feeling excited? Am I feeling Tim and Julie talk right now? And I'm wanting to, yes, heck yeah, they're right. This is the way I want to feel. This is the way I do feel. Or are you going like, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know about this
Yeah, it
truck.
goes another year.
I got it. Yeah, exactly. I'm just going to let 2025 go and I'll just get my shit together in 2026. Or, oh, you know what? I started out the year wanting to get in shape and I know I went to the gym 3 times. Is that how you're acting? Well, you're going to have an accumulation effect that's not going to work out for you going into the future. And you're going to wish you would have made different decisions. That's just the reality of it. I think, Julie, a lot of this comes down to, I was on a call for eXp Realty and I was and I told you about this before. And it was very profound because I remember that just, as clear as day, these two people that were older than us that were on this, I'm not going to say anything bad about them. I'm not going to say anything good about them. They're just average, normal looking, normal acting people, nice personalities and all the rest of it. They look probably a little older than they actually were. And I remember she started talking and he wasn't saying much. She was the dominant person. And she started talking about how she was not anticipating like living much longer. And I don't remember
Mhm.
exactly the phrases that she used, but she said something 3 times that made me like stop. Maybe this lady's got a health problem and I don't know about it. I mean, what's going
Yeah.
on? Like, and so as we all got more comfortable with each other, this was a couple that was thinking about moving over, and Julie and I at our EXP Realty group. And I listened. So I stopped her and I said, "Are you okay? Is there a health problem? I mean, because you realize you've said this." And I repeated to her what she had just said, and she didn't realize she'd been saying it. So she didn't realize that she'd been saying all of this sort of doomy and gloomy stuff about her future. And what she also didn't realize, remember the husband was sitting right next to her, that every time, not the first time, but I remember the second and third time, she said something that was doomy and gloomy about her future, her health. He looked over at her. He went like this or like this, he looked over at her and
Yeah.
like, what the hell's going on, lady? What are you talking about? And so I stopped the conversation. She didn't realize that she'd been saying these things, didn't even realize the words were coming out of her mouth, which tells you how subconscious these thoughts were that were, percolating up through her vocal cords. And I asked her, I said, so let me ask you a question. I said, if you had, and really, you guys will get the punchline here in a second. I said, if you had an abundance of money, if you had enough money coming in every single month, more than enough to cover all your personal overhead, like what's your personal overhead? It was like 10,000. I said, so if you've got like say 20 or 30,000 coming in every single month, passively, not coming from home sales, not coming from rental properties, not coming from anything that you actually have to do, mailbox money, as people are fond of saying. Uh, what difference would that make? Like, explain to me how you would feel. And she resisted me at first. And then I asked it again. I'm very persistent. And she then, her face changed. I, I don't know how to express it other than it almost like she got her whole something inside of her, a switch went off and you could see it through a Zoom, and her physicality changed. And I said, so and I wanted her to stay with that emotional state. So then I started asking her, I said, well, where would you travel? And then she started rattling off all these places. And I said, well, have you been to Italy before? No, I've not. I've always wanted. Okay. Well, and then we go to France and all these other things and just start a whole beautiful picture of what her future would be like if she didn't have to worry about money. So I said, you're telling me that right now, the difference between you having this spectacular dream life would be, essentially creating $10,000 a month passively through eXp Realty's revenue share. That would change all your perspectives to the extent that you'd want to. I said, so what would you do? And I did ask this question. Again, I'm direct and that is what it is. And she did give me permission. I said, what would you be doing differently physically? What would you, and I would be going to the gym. We'd be doing this. So you guys get what I'm saying? You get the point here? Because she was feeling pessimistic about her financial future because she was at a point in her life where she couldn't visualize herself wanting or having the desire to, maybe even physically having a desire to go on listing appointments, do what's necessary to be successful in real estate. She was sort of writing the last chapter in her books, of her life, her lifetime book. She was writing the last chapter subconsciously, and it wasn't going to last much longer. Based on what she was saying, she wasn't even seeing herself being alive or couldn't visualize herself.
She'd kind of already given up.
She had, and not really, I won't say given up. She was looking for something new to believe in. And she didn't realize that the thing that she had to believe in was herself and her husband sitting right next to her. They just needed a bigger mission. They just needed something. They needed to believe that their tomorrow was going to be better for today. So I said, well, why don't we have a conversation after you guys have moved over to eXp? Why don't we have a conversation exactly how we can help you to build your revenue share group up to the point where you're making $10,000 a month? And she said, she was like delighted. And everything, they went from sort of being standoffish and, I don't know, dour, if that's, if I'm using that word right, and to being excited, to being motivated. It was amazing. I mean, I've told, you guys have heard this on the podcast before, but that's how much of an impact it had on me, because it really solidified how important it is that we are always in a state of optimism. If not optimism, if we're always in a state of not fighting against our innate nature to wanting to improve and realize that our tomorrows can be better than our todays. So I'll ask you, and I'll ask you to consider, if you're in a state where you're not feeling optimistic and
Optimistic.
thank you, and excited about tomorrow, then you need to take responsibility for that and stop waiting around for someone to tap you on the shoulder and say, tomorrow, well, maybe that's what Julie and I are doing right now. We're just sort of reminding you of your innate nature. You need to be in alignment with people that are going to walk the path with you. You need to be getting rid of the things and the people and the environments that are holding you back. It's probably your real estate brokerage. It might be your town. It might be your friend group.
Well, it could be several things, right? It could be a little bit of each of those things that you just have to recalibrate. And I think a lot of what we're talking about today is being sort of stuck in your own zone and not realizing maybe some of these habits have gotten out of control,
right?
Or maybe they're not exactly what you want to have happen. Maybe you got a little complacency over here. But one of the things that I think that you would agree with as a coach is when something slips over here, like maybe I'm just sleeping in a little bit too much, or maybe, I used to work out every day, but that kind of sucked. So I'm only going to do it when I feel like it. Well, once you slide over here, then maybe something like your lead generation or talking to your sellers, your lead follow-up, that kind of slides a little bit. And then because that's gotten off track and your days aren't going like you want, now you're having a little bit extra to drink tonight, which means you're going to bed too late, which now means that you're not following your morning schedule. And even though you wouldn't necessarily as yourself identify these 5 or 6 things, maybe you would only say, well, yeah, I really need to get back to the gym every day. Maybe you'd say that one thing because you're in that spiral yourself and you're dealing with all these other things in your life. Sometimes it does take somebody from the outside. And I walk past a lot of your Zoom calls, especially the EXP ones, where I'll see somebody's inner light go off because
It's
they
awesome.
have that.
I love
it's that aha moment. They'll go,
Yeah.
I just needed that little catalyst to believe again that my future is going to be better tomorrow than it is today. Not only that belief, but that that person have control of that, and that I'm not being controlled by all these outside forces that I have nothing to do with. It's getting you back into control because of the human condition, wanting to move forward, wanting to progress. We wouldn't have things like electricity and cars and utilities, and we wouldn't have any of that stuff if it weren't for the human condition of always wanting to improve and invent and get better and move forward. It's just how humans are. So when you're fighting against that, or at least not in alignment with that natural trajectory, that's when things go awry. And a lot of this is interconnected, and it does take somebody from the outside. Maybe it's just one little simple Zoom call saying, hey, I just feel like I'm off track. A lot of people come to coaching because they feel stuck, and they get stuck for different reasons. So sometimes it just takes somebody who cares about you looking in saying, you know what, you can do that. And you're right. It's at least 50 or 60% just helping you re-believe and reinvest in yourself.
Julie, I think you and I give people systems that are practical that they can apply to their lives and help them to have, get
I
back
hope
on
so.
track. But
Hmm.
I don't really believe that you and I have ever introduced anybody to a completely new thought because I don't know if you guys have experienced the aha moment, as it were, or even anytime you hear something that you know is true that resonates with you, all you're being doing is reminded of something that's inside of you already.
That's right. I believe that too.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know. I mean,
I think that's why you see it in somebody's face when they
they're
light up
reminded.
is
Yeah.
because you just reactivated what's already within them.
Yeah, and maybe they've never had the thought consciously before, but it's part of who they are. It's in their DNA, it's
Yes.
in their souls.
Hmm.
And so that's all really I think a good coach does, let alone a great coach, is we're not very rarely are we telling you how to do something which, that the reason it resonates and the reason it works is because it's already inside of you. We're just essentially ringing the bell and reminding you that you have
Yes.
it within you. Yeah. So, I mean, that's, you asked me a long time ago, really where my mind was at. That's where it's at. I'm always, every time I, strap on my headset and you and I get on camera or on mic, I'm always thinking, how can you and I deliver something to the folks out there? What is the message that they need to hear? And how can I, most importantly, how can you and I say it in such a way that it'll be receptive to the most people? And that's the challenge because a lot of people are going to look for reasons not to listen. Because they're so stuck in the idea that, maybe they're just so believing the politics are going to
Yeah.
somehow, look, people are so reactionary to the stupidest things with regards to politics. It's absolutely
Yeah.
insane. I think that all goes back to what we're talking about. It takes a lot to accept the fact that your current lot in life is a direct result of the decisions you did or didn't make in the past. Because
Hmm.
it's so much easier to blame your current circumstance on something out of your control, because then you don't have to make any discomforting decision or just
Sure.
you don't have to make any
You don't have
decisions
to
that
be
might
accountable.
right, you don't have to make any decisions that might result in you being just uncomfortable, right?
Hmm.
So it's so simple and it's seductive, it really is, to try to pin the tail on the donkey as I'm not wealthier because I'm not healthier because look, and there's always another boogeyman. Oh, I'm not healthier because big food or wherever the hell it's called, right? It's trying to keep me fat. No, big food or wherever the hell it's called, they make the Twinkies. You put them in your head, right? And
It's
you
true.
cannot tell me that yellow spongy thing, any part of you thought that
Ugh.
that was good for you, right? It just,
Yeah. Yeah.
so you're the one that you have self-determination. God gave us the ability to choose the decisions that we make, but some people would rather have other, and I think a lot of this also has to do with, what happened as a result of, you know, frankly, COVID and things like that. A lot of people
Yeah.
were it was fascinating to watch how many people were so willing to comply versus others that weren't. And, um, there's something, all of us want to feel like everyone, the, the belief structures that we had around government and the belief structures we had around the people in white coats. And I don't want to talk about this, but much longer than what I'm saying, but it was fascinating to watch how many people were so willing to comply versus the few people that weren't. And the few people that weren't were not just torn down, but they were hated on, caught on fire,
Hmm.
blown up,
Canceled.
canceled by the people that wanted to comply. And
Hmm.
that right now is what's probably, ooh, I just figured out how to close that loop. I think if you're caught in a negative adult failure spiral now, it's probably because if you have tried to get out of that adult failure spiral, the other people that are in there with you in the blender, right? They don't want you to get out and they're going to try to keep you in. It's the crabs in the bucket story, if you guys have ever heard that before. And Julie and I've actually experimented. We were visiting with Penny McLaughlin in Bainbridge Island off the coast of Washington State. And this was way back in the 90s. And this is when Julie and I are involved in Howard Brinton. And a beautiful, idyllic little island, and we saw crabs in a bucket, sure enough. And you'd see one crab. We'd heard the story, but we actually wanted to see it,
Yeah.
about the crabs in the bucket. And we saw one crab put his little crabby hand over the edge, and the other crabs would just jump and pull him back in. And it happened over and
No
over.
need for a lid.
No need for a lid, right? The crabs will always keep themselves in the bucket. Well, societally, that's what happens with people, and people are doing the same
Mhm.
thing to each other. So if you're going to make the most of the remaining years that you have in your life, you're going to have to start looking around, looking over your shoulder, and you're going to have to say, that's a crab, that's a crab, that's a crab. What I'm reading is a crab. What I'm listening to is a crab. These things are trying to keep me in this bucket. And maybe it's time that I decide to turn the bucket over myself, or maybe it's time that I throw two hooks over and pull myself and get the
Yeah,
hell out. You
that's
know,
right.
no, I think we've belabored this. Julie, you had some funny stories of about
Save
parrots and
last
stuff
time.
that I know you've saved for the past 2 Fridays that we haven't
All
told,
right.
and you told me about them, and I want to hear those
Well,
stories.
let me try and tie this in.
Okay,
So,
good luck.
should you find yourself in one of those days, where things seem to be going sideways, or maybe you've got a transaction that's not acting properly, then step aside and change the pattern. One of the things that I like to do is I look for interesting, funny side stories that have nothing to do with anything about coaching, real estate, or anything else. So allow
She
me
is
to,
really, really trying to
I'm
loop
trying to
her
land the
crazy
plane.
stories into what we were just talking about. Let's
All
see how
right.
she does it. I'm in
Let's see if I
suspense.
can find my favorite one. Let's see. I had a parrot theme this week. I'm going to start with one, but the second one I like even better. So the first one, the headline is Naughty Parrot Keeps Using Alexa to Buy Things Online. So let me these are all short, so don't worry.
Hey, Julie,
Uh,
is the mic pointing right at you, or are you talking
yes,
over it?
I,
Okay.
I'm I'm right as far. Is that better?
Yeah,
I'm
no, it
careful
was
with
you
it.
were good before. I just was making
Okay.
sure.
So here's the headline. Who's a clever boy then? A parrot called Rocco has been placing orders online by chatting to a voice-activated device like Alexa. The parrot swooped in for some early Christmas shopping, buying watermelons, raisins, broccoli, ice cream, a light bulb, and even a kite. Unfortunately, those items were not on his owner's Christmas wish list, but are all the things that Rocco likes to eat. Although we're not sure what a parrot needs with a light bulb or a kite. It's not the first time the naughty parrot has been in trouble. He was actually rehomed from the National Animal Welfare Trust Sanctuary in Berkshire, this is in the UK, because staff thought his bad language might upset visitors. Sanctuary worker Marion volunteered to foster him and took him to her home in Oxfordshire. The African grey, a breed known for its ability to copy words, added shopping to a virtual supermarket list by speaking to the device. So, anyway, that's my first
Well, but let's fill in the
parrot
blanks.
story.
So let's fill in the blanks. So this bird basically would listen to its bird mama ordering stuff off the Alexa. And so the bird is super smart and figured out, okay, well, I'll just say what she says. And you
Yes.
told me, I don't know if it's a different bird story, but weren't you telling me there
Oh,
was,
yeah,
you have
there's an even
another one?
better one.
All right,
These are
there's
all
even,
African gray parrots, by the way. There's something about them, I guess.
okay.
Let's see. So here's the second one. These parrots won't stop swearing. Will they learn to behave or will they corrupt the entire flock? This is again from a British zoo. A few years ago, a zoo in Britain went viral for its foul mouthed parrots that wouldn't stop swearing. Now, three more birds at Lincolnshire Wildlife Park have developed the same bad habit, and zoo staffers have devised a risky plan to curb their bad behavior. We've put 8 really, really offensive swearing parrots with 92 non swearing parrots. The executive says, let's see, by integrating the chatty birds into the larger flock of well behaved birds, parrots, they hope that the group's good manners will rub off on the troublemakers. Well, the swearing saga began back in 2020 when 5 African gray parrots, Billy, Elsie, Eric, Jade, and Tyson, were donated to the wildlife park in eastern England. The 5 bad-mouthed birds seem to be egging each other on, prompting staffers to separate them and send each one to a different area of the zoo. But isolation wasn't enough to solve the problem because 3 newly donated birds, Captain, Sheila, and another Eric, have now developed a tendency to squawk expletives. This time, rather than keeping them separate, zookeepers have decided to muffle the swearing by placing them with a larger flock. People think parrots are loud birds, but they talk really quietly, says Nichols to BBC News. I'm hoping above the general noise of the flock, the swearing will be drowned out. But about 30 of the parrots at the wildlife park make noises other than swearing. They do sounds like Trex reversing, others imitate microwaves. Nichols is hopeful the new additions will learn these and other innocuous sounds. Of course, the plan could backfire. What if the 8 miscreants corrupt the entire flock? We could end up with 100 swearing parrots on our hands. So anyway, that's one of
Well,
my
but so
favorite stories.
you told me another one. We were on our walk the other morning. You said
Oh,
that the
which
what
one?
The one that was ordering the parrot food, the parrot
Oh, that was
treats.
the first one we just talked about, that they had to finally get rid of the Alexa because he kept on ordering parrot treats.
Yeah, he kept on. So
Yeah.
the parrot was like realizing that he could order his own treats from Alexa and
Yes,
Amazon would deliver.
that's right. Yeah. Okay, I
Uh,
have one more, which you and I both came across. Let's see. Where did that go? Oh, about the kayak. Let me
you
find
know,
out.
some we should teach parrots to prospect expireds and for sale by
I
owners.
know, right?
We could teach them and then we could sell those trained birds to our coaching clients, and then the birds could do the appointment setting for them.
Totally. Well, I lost the copy of this, but one of my favorite stories from last week, and I was thinking about this because, here in Puerto Rico, we've been hearing, citing, and seeing our friends posting on Facebook and other places that they've been seeing these blue whales breaching like right off the coast. You'd see the spout and then you'd see them come out and, these huge whales. Well, there was a story, I believe that the kayaker was Venezuelan, and this was off of the coast of Chile where they were, just kayaking around. And this guy actually gets swallowed by a whale, like the real life Jonah.
Well,
Okay.
his dad was videotaping them. They were out there
Yeah.
together. The
His
son
dad had
got
like a
swallowed,
GoPro on his helmet.
and his dad had a videotape of the kid. Well, as a grown ass man, but
Yeah.
him and his boat getting sucked in the mouth of a whale. That happened.
Yes.
It was on video. You guys can try to search this online.
Let's see if I can find that. Well, the funny thing is yeah, and I've lost it since I had
It's
that
okay.
pulled up. Okay, so the funny thing is that when they interviewed him, he said, "Yeah, something came up behind me. I closed my eyes for a minute. I went under, and when I opened my eyes, I realized that I was in the mouth of a whale. So then I started to think about what I would do to survive inside this whale. And like a couple seconds later, he spits me back up. Like, what a crazy day. That had to
Did he
be a
say?
Monday, I guess.
Didn't he? It was a Monday. Didn't he say the inside of the whale, the mouth was slimy?
Yeah, he said the first thing I noticed was that it was really slimy in there. Like, how crazy is that? Like, so I like stories where you can look at, all right, you think that you've had kind of a weird sketch day. How about being swallowed by a whale? That's
But
worse.
you know what I was just thinking as you were talking, telling your stories, all animated. Hopefully, you guys are watching Julie on YouTube. If you're like not somebody who's generally a joke teller and you're wanting to basically entertain other people, make them feel better, because the people are always going to remember how you made them feel.
Yeah.
These little stories that she just shared with you, or she just read two of them off of her computer, it could have been on your iPhones. Those would be great little things to carry around in your literal back pocket. So
I like
when
to
you're
collect them.
yeah, but when you're over the gym and you're staying in line at Starbucks and you want to just read somebody a real quick snippet, they're gonna laugh and they're gonna remember you forever having made them feel good. So whatever their temporary emotional state is, you're gonna uplift them for sure. These little things are survival techniques, especially during times of uncertainty. Which, by the way, I have news for you. I can tell you this with 100% certainty, having been on this planet for more than half a century, is that you are always in a time of uncertainty. And there
Indeed.
always will be,
One way or another, right?
one way or another. So anything
Yeah.
else you want to run
No,
over?
I hopefully we can end it on a light note. I think, life's too short to get stuck in the doom and gloom scroll, and everybody has better days and worse days. But you do have the power to change the tone. You have the power to change your habits. And it just, I often have coaching calls where they're like, maybe they're even really good at proactive lead generation, but they just feel like they're in the grind of it, and it's like Groundhog Day. And then, especially like we remember in the Midwest, you're doing that, and there's a blizzard, and then it's pretty for a while, but then like the next day there's a snowstorm, and then there's ice, and the clouds are out there, and it's
And
gray, and
by the
there's no
way,
leaves on the
it,
trees.
it's
Right?
July, just to put this in perspective, we were in
No, it's
Ohio.
not that bad. But
Yeah.
but let's say, all that's happening, and then you have this and this and this, and it's easy to feel like, all right, I just need a pattern interrupt here. And this is when people start planning their next vacation, which is great. And sometimes my coaching homework to coaching clients is, look, you got a 3-day weekend coming up. What are you going to do to refill your cup? Because you're going to be better on the other side of that. And a lot of, let's be honest, especially our one-on-one clients are very like, I don't need a break. I'm just going to power through. That's like a badge of honor, which I do appreciate about them, but sometimes they can burn themselves out without realizing. You're always better on the other end of refilling the cup. You're going to be better for yourself, your spouse, your family, your kids, your clients. So just give that to yourself. You don't have to wait 6 months for your next vacation. Sometimes I call them like mind snacks. I'll go and I'll grab a little mind snack to entertain. You do this too with sometimes it's your racing videos. Sometimes you send me and Zoe the Instagram like animal rescue stuff. That's great. There's one that I follow on Facebook called the Asher House. He's got like 400 or 500 dogs at a sanctuary, and every single one of them has a story. I just, I like the pattern interrupt of that. Now, that's not to say I'm spending hours on end of it. That's why I call them mind snacks. I want a 2-minute thing that is cheerful and uplifting and can just change the pattern.
Well, the low calorie too, right? Cheerful and uplifting. That's going to change the pattern. But I'll
Yeah.
say this too. When you do go, I remember, Julie, you'll remember this too. Let me try to actually, okay. You and I we'd been married for maybe a year, and we were living at 280 East Jeffrey.
Uh-huh.
Don't try to tell my
I'm
story
trying
yet.
to read your mind because you're going in the Wayback Machine right now.
I'm in the Wayback Machine. Okay. And so we bought a used 1990 blue, maritime blue Miata,
Yeah.
which
I
Julie drove every day.
I bet I know the
And we
story.
decided that we are going to drive out to Seattle. And we were living in Ohio. To be young. Anyway, so we
In a
decided we were going
Miata.
to in a Miata, right? And we didn't have a lot of money. This was before we got real estate licenses. I don't remember the time frame, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yep. And so we decided we were going to drive out to Seattle. My brother lived in Seattle. We were going to surprise him for his birthday on August 12th. So we had a deadline, right? A goal's a dream, with an action plan. Goals must be measurable, specific, written down regularly. And, we started out with having a deadline. We're going to be out there by August 12th. We didn't want to drive straight out, but let's just be honest, we were broke. And so we couldn't afford a lot of hotels, but we had enough. We kind of stayed at friends' houses on the way out, Julie's aunt in Chicago and some other places. But we were driving out. I don't remember the reason I'm telling the story now. Oh, I do. So we were driving out. I'll tell you guys a funny story. So we sure as heck didn't know this. So if you don't know this, don't be embarrassed. Well, there's this place called Sturgis, South Dakota, and Sturgis every year there's this epic motorcycle show. And by saying epic, I don't even know how to describe how many motorcycles. So Julie and I
Thousands
are
and
driving out.
thousands.
Julie and I are driving out. We leave Chicago. And we figured that, Chicago, we're going to stop up. We're going to drive for, we're young, so we could drive for 8 hours, no big deal, in a Miata. And we were listening to Tony Robbins tapes, the whole big
Yeah.
ass. Yeah. And so it was a tape deck, And so, we kept on driving, and it's like every single hotel, no vacancies. And every single hotel was full of motorcycles.
This
And
this
so,
was when we got to Wyoming.
yeah. Yeah, and
Yeah.
so we had to keep on driving, and then like we were like finally stopped, and we asked some of these motorcycle guys, "What the hell's going on?" And I think we even stopped in Sturgis or something. We learned the difference between riders and haulers, and like haulers are people that go to Sturgis every year and they haul their
Yeah.
bikes in the back of their Range Rovers, and riders are the ones that consider themselves real. All this thing, so it was motorcycles flipping everywhere. And it turns out we're decided in all of our amazing planning to drive out west during bike week, which is really like bike month.
Yeah. And
We,
all the time we were like, gosh, people just drive a lot of motorcycles out west.
yeah.
I guess everybody just rides a motorcycle when you're out
And
here.
Julie and I are in this little Miata, and we're being surrounded by motorcycles. A lot of them are real honest to God motorcycle gangs. And here's Julie and I like, Julie, do not look to the left. Do not look to the right. That guy next to you in the motorcycle looks like he's about to scoop you out of the car.
Yeah.
And we're sure as hell not going to drive faster than them, So we're just being
No.
very respectful. And so we kind of learned the law of the land, like, A, avoid them. That's number one rule.
Be
B,
polite.
if you be polite and be very respectful and like let them in when they, what I'm saying here. When you're a flea amongst the mastodons, you don't necessarily want the mastodon to, acknowledge that so anyway, we're driving. We finally find a place to stay. It was in Wyoming, Julie. Is that where we
Mhm.
had to drive? It
Gillette,
was
Wyoming.
how
Yeah.
how many hours were we on the road that day?
It's like 14 or 15, something like that.
And a Miata.
It's like all the hours.
We probably didn't even have to stop for gas once. That thing got such good gas mileage. So I remember the experience. The reason I'm remembering all this is because that was the first time Julie and I were out in the Midwest, or out of Ohio, really.
Mhm.
And, and now the difference between the landscape and I'm setting aside the motorcycle story, but how things look, the open spaces. And as soon as we start getting close to mountains and all the rest of it, I will never forget how excited I was to call my dad and
Yeah.
tell him how, and he'd, done something similar. It was probably the motivation for Julie and I to do it.
Mhm.
In the 1960s, he'd driven a 1962 or 61 Triumph TR3 out to work at Lockheed Martin, and Dad used to work in the aerospace industry, and so he drove. He was an engineer, so he drove out, and there's this picture we have of him in this TR3 and the whole thing. But that was probably my dad did it. We have to do it too. But I remember just looking around and seeing how unbelievably beautiful it was, and
Me
how
too. Mhm.
it really put into perspective how much perspective we still had to gain, how many experiences we still had to have. And then we went out to Seattle. We had that experience. And we drove back through the Rocky Mountains and stayed at my Aunt Reba's house and just all these things. And that very experience, when we were in our formidable years, after we'd just been married for maybe a year, was one of the biggest, most impactful things, because we realized how unbelievable the world is and how much more there is to experience. And it really caused us to have expansive thinking. And so from that point forward, as we got into real estate and we could afford to do different things, we
Mhm.
started going places for our vacations that would surround us with more experiences that would intentionally cause us to be uncomfortable. And I'll give you guys another one. I remember when the first time Julie and I went out to Southern California, and we saw what, being in your 20s and, it would have been like had we grown up here. And it's completely different than had we grown up in Ohio. And then we started exposing ourselves to different people and different experiences and different things and different books and all these things.
Mhm.
And the more of those types of experiences we had, forcing ourselves, this was before the internet. The internet didn't come around until 1996, 1997. And so we were having all these experiences. And so our world was very small living in Ohio, because we had massive lack of exposure. And and I understand why. Like, there's a statistic from, I think it's the Social Security Administration, that like 90% of everyone is born and dies within the same, I think it's 25-mile radius of the
Yeah.
exact same spot. And when we got back to Columbus, and we had just had these big expansive experiences, and we tried to do as many of those different things as we went on our little, Julie was mentioning going on a little spring break, whatever it is. Don't go to the same place you've gone every year. You know what? You've had that experience. Don't go on another damn cruise. You've done that before. Do something that's going to cause you to be uncomfortable. Do something that's going to, like, go to Japan. We told Zoe last night we're going to take her to Japan next year. That's one of our goals that we set. Go do something that's going to cause yourself to be uncomfortable, and don't immediately try to go back to feeling secure and comfortable, because it's within the discomfort that you can start allowing new thoughts to reignite inside of you. Because remember, these are all already inside of you. So if you feel, it doesn't matter how old you are or how, young or old, it doesn't matter what your education level is or any of these things, you have so much potential that's all around you if you just embrace it, if you just allow it in your life. And you might end up still going back to Columbus, Ohio, and living within that same 25-mile radius, but you'll be a changed person because you were
Your perspective will be different.
yeah. And people will, you're going to become more successful then, because your perspective is different, because you feel more in alignment with your soul and more appreciative of being alive. And it's just so much. And you keep on reinforcing that. That's the main thing. Keep on reinforcing it when you're operating at the highest, on that wavelength that's innate in
Mhm.
all of you, and reinforce it with the people, the books, the podcasts now, and now with the internet. Internet's the greatest curse and the greatest blessing. It just depends on which frequency you decide to tune into.
How
We
do you
talk.
use the tool?
Yeah, social media, everyone said, oh, social media is the bane of human existence. That's not true. Julie and I look for funny animal things to share with each other and make our kid laugh.
Yeah.
That's just, hopefully you guys are, I know a lot of you, thousands of you literally are totally and completely on the same page as us. And we're on the same page as you, because we've been walking this journey with a lot of you guys for decades, right? You guys have been tuned in to Julie and I in one form or another for decades, and we with you as well. And so I think we need to collectively, as a group of like-minded, optimistic, people, all of us, all thousands, that 5,000, 7,000 that are listening right now, not to mention on YouTube, we all need to basically start looking for other people that we can invite into our tent and have other people realize what a blessing we're all living within. And, you know, as long as it's a great day, any day you wake up and you're looking at the green side of the grass, I'm looking out my window at the green side of the grass.
Yeah.
It's a great day any day you wake up and you're looking at the green side of the grass. That should be basically your threshold, you know, because
Mhm.
everything's possible. And so
That's
I
right.
think this is a good way and a good place to round off today's podcast. What do you
I
think,
agree.
Julie?
Yep. That's the pod.
So, guys, thank you for that's applied, and thank you for keeping our podcast so popular. It's our pleasure and our honor to be part of your life and have all of you part of our lives. And yeah, help us get the word out. Like and subscribe. Share the podcast with other folks. If you're watching us on a reel, share the video. If you're watching us on YouTube, share the video. Yeah, let us help others understand that life is a blessing uh, of your own creation. And yeah, so congratulations on being smart enough to have gotten a real estate license. Get ready for the next 25 years. And maybe 25 years from now, we're all going to be on the same very, you know, channel and talking about, wow, that was a great 25 years. Glad we were
Exactly.
all, you know, taking the right actions in 2025. So have a
Right.
fantastic day and we'll talk with you on the show tomorrow.